everybody on meeting number 10, our final stop on this journey. And I guess first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for hanging in there. I think there've been very good discussions. It's great to be able to have community representation as part of our process as we're moving forward. Certainly, there's a lot for us to process. There's some big numbers and some big plans that we want to be able to forward, but I think it's important for us to set the stage from a community standpoint of what the needs are, certainly from our subject matter experts and the administrative staff that have been with us throughout this whole time. I think for me that back and forth process has been really important. So just first of all, thank you. Tonight we wanted to be able to just refine the presentation to the school board. So of the recommendations coming out of this committee. So that's the purpose of what we're going to take a look at tonight. We do have the workshop scheduled with the school board on July 8th. So I put a placeholder for that time on the school board's calendar. I'll send an email out for anybody that's interested. We'd like to have a couple committee members, if possible, be present just to be able to give some voice from people that have participated in the process. I know it's a difficult time of year, but we'll send an email out, and if you're interested in that or able to do that, that would be a board meeting night, so it would start at like 6 o'clock. I think it's the 8th, isn't that the Wednesday?
Friday.
That's a Friday?
I thought it was a June.
Then it would be the 13th. It's the 13th?
Okay.
What's that Wednesday? Why was I thinking?
Okay.
Oh, I was thinking June 8th. I'm sorry. Get my board meetings mixed up. Yes, it would be July 13th. July 13th, my bad. July 13th. So 6 o'clock start for that meeting, but we would essentially go through this presentation, allow any committee members to be able to give voice to what their experience was, and go from there. So, all right. So one of the things, so I want to walk through the PowerPoint. You've got paper copies that are at your tables, and so one of the things that I did was kind of go through and refine a little bit on what we had from the last at our last meeting. We just wanted to throw that out there for everybody to think. When I went through it on my own after the meeting, then I got like this death by a PowerPoint feel of like way too much text, way too much kind of going on some of the slides. So what I asked our team to do is be able to slim that down a little bit, be a little bit more concise on the presentation part of it. So I want to be able to just walk through that tonight with you. Certainly, if we want to expand on any areas, we can do that. But I also want to be conscious of the fact that we'll have, all of the feedback forms and things will be something that the board will see, but we won't go to the board at their workshop and say, here's the feedback from meeting number 1. 1, 2, 3, like that type of thing. We'll give them access to all of that so they can see the context. And the board gets the board packet on the Thursday, so basically a week ahead of time. So they'd have enough information that they'd be able to process through the context of the presentation. But we'd like to be able to keep the presentations as much as we can to around 10, 15 minutes, starts to be a little bit long, and then to have some discussions as part of our process. So knowing that we had a lot of information that we went through, a lot of questions that we processed, I don't want to cut it short. So that's why I wanted to be able to just have an opportunity tonight to be able to talk with you about our appropriate presentation to provide that context, but again, to be able to do it in an engaging way that doesn't kill anybody by looking at too many slides or too much text on any particular slide. So you'll see some dramatic changes from what we saw last week to this week, so I just want to be able to provide you with some context to that. So my thought was to, unless anybody has any questions or feedback, to be able to just go through the presentation and kind of just get at it, if that's all right with everybody. So, all right. So again, this are all in the handouts that you have. So starting with just getting background and process summary, to give some context and not only for board members, but we'll have community members. It's a public meeting, so we have community members that will be watching. So just working through the process of our facilities planning, essentially, from 2017. Working through the facility FAC 1.0, which resulted in the successful referendum questions, and moving into where we currently are. So again, this is part of a larger process as we're moving forward, so we want to be able to provide some context into that. And then finally, the development of this group, authorizing the FAC 2.0 to address fine arts and athletic needs. So again, where it falls in the bigger scheme of things. So this is going back and reminding the board of what their charge was of you, because it's been a little bit of time, and specifically around our 4 areas that we look to investigate and make sure that we had some of the value statements and the purpose of what we're trying to do explained. So again, foundations of the process, the fact that we have a facility advisory committee, and then we also have subject matter experts. So to talk about give them some context about how the meetings went, who was present, why that back and forth I think was really important, helped inform each other as we move forward. So to be able to give a little bit of perspective on that. Talk about the schedule. So again, just met 10 times between February and May, and the 4 different projects. Each project had 1 meeting on concept and solutions and 1 meeting on a revised solution and approximate cost based on the 2027 bidding construction estimates, if you will. Give them an idea of what they're about to see. Yeah.
Are you looking for feedback on each slide as we go along, or?
If you'd like, yes. I'm happy.
I don't want to kill anybody either with.
I'm open, no, I'm wide open to feedback. Yes. Go ahead.
Well, is the school board going to receive a fuller report on everything we discussed and the information we're given? I was thinking about some of the shortcomings of the existing facilities. I assume they're aware of it, but if anybody were looking at the recommendation, they go, well, where's why are we doing this?
Yeah, so typically we have we would have a written report that would provide a lot of the details. That's where I would put the feedback slides that we have from each time. And some of those, and some of the shortcomings or some of the context that we want to provide. Some of the feedback that we wrote down on the placemats. That was kind of my thought. I don't know, Dave, did you have any kind of thoughts on that, the written report part of it, kind of the details?
Well, what we would probably do in the written report is it'll build in the why. All the history stuff will be built right into the written report, so it'll all be in there. As far as the community members knowing the why, I think that first slide in terms of what the board, the big change was all the facility advisory work and the consolidation plan work that had been done previously was really deeply focused on the academic spaces. And as such, we didn't specifically address the 4 items you guys have been focusing on the past several months. I think that's okay to tell that story, because then what happened was there was that, which led the board to create and commission this group to go ahead and take a look for the sole express purpose of having recommendations back to them that they can act on when appropriate and when the funding becomes available. So I think just telling that story as short as possible will connect the dots for community members who aren't aware this is happening. I mean, that to me does that meet what you're thinking, or what do you?
I'm remembering some of the comments about like the swimming pool, the current swimming pool and the flooding, and I mean, those are pretty convincing reasons why it'd be okay to look at replacing things. Whereas if somebody weren't aware of those issues with the existing facilities, then they might go, why are we looking at this?
So like the top 5 pain points of each of the 4 items?
Maybe.
You know, I think that kind of getting at the why behind, why is the board so focused in on this? Why do they think this is an important exercise for not only you, but for them, and potentially to bring to the community? That's not a bad idea. I mean, we could easily generate those. I mean, the pool ones, yeah, you're right. I mean, but there's also
Auditorium.
yeah, there's not a shortage. That's why I said you keep it to the top 5 pain points, because people usually don't read past the 3rd bullet, so you want to make sure we've prioritized the 3 most important ones sitting right in front of them.
And we've got some of that why baked into as we get to each one of these areas, like in the slides coming up. So it might address that. So let's maybe keep that in mind as we. Good. Any other feedback on the slides at this point? Yeah, feel free to raise your hand, shout, stand up, stop.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So in the mission that we were given, there's this concept of a solution that maximizes use and reuse. And so also, I guess in the written report, would we be explaining what we plan to reuse or continue using? As opposed to what because if somebody says, okay, so you propose this big plan that's gonna cost X number of millions of dollars, are you just gonna throw away the old facilities?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, so we could tease that out. So you're just around this,
Yep.
kind of this principle and be able to use that. Yeah, I think we could do that. So as we would be, I'm trying to think of examples. So like the tracks, for example. So the tracks and schools, that we'll continue to use those, do the best we can, with that facility, as that. And then in each area, if we have those reuse areas in each area, yeah, we can certainly do that. Okay, no, that's good. Anything else?
Well, okay, so I'm still
Yep.
thinking about Tickler Auditorium. Is there any way we can avoid tearing it down?
You mean Webster?
That Webster?
Sorry, Webster.
Yeah, Webster. No,
No? Is it
No.
Bonner?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the new elementary.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no way to preserve that space. The good news is I do believe we're going to be using the seating. Are we moving that here and bringing it into Cooper Auditorium? So we'll be reusing the seating portion of it.
We'll
Well, that's
probably
good.
use it at West High School.
Oh, and at West. So it will continue to live on.
All right, no, that's fine, no, that's good. Anything else at this point? So let's see, cover those process, schedule. Common themes, so a couple things that we thought drawing out common themes that cut across all four of these areas that we wanted to be able to highlight. One, facilities to support Oshkosh as a destination city. Thought that was important, not only for people to be able to come and use the facilities, but also as potentially a place to be able to say, hey, it's got a lot of great facilities. We want to be able to raise our kids here. We want to be able to maybe settle down here. So thought that was a theme that cut across all four of those. We're building facilities, and who are we building the facilities for? So it's Oshkosh students and teams, community members, local clubs, weekend invite, tournaments, venues, as we would look at, again, all four of those areas to be able to just identify that it's not just a school, a school hour or a school specific space, but it would be a much broader use for all of those areas. And then project funding, the projects may require private funding donations along with funding being provided via future OASD referenda. So again, the idea is who's going to pay for this type of thing. I thought it would be important to be clear, like across the board on this, that we're open to private funding. I think that's part of the advantage of having this plan and having it be, a pretty long runway until we are likely to get to referendum again, is that we would have something tangible to be able to show somebody that would have some means and some interest that here's what this larger plan looks like. So I think being able to express that as part of the presentation is important, and I think that applies across the board. Certainly there's people that have a variety of different interests. I wouldn't want to say that we're just taking donations or sponsorship on this area and not this area. Like, as we know, these numbers are big, so we want to be able to be realistic with potentially what we can accept. So those are things that we're thinking of as common themes that kind of cut across all three of those. Is there anything that pops in your head that would be maybe something else to highlight across all three, or all four areas, I should say?
help but think about how the politics of the board and of the community has changed since I was on the board. It's like day and night in many ways. We've got 10 years of this plan out there, basically. How do we get the community to and the community knows that. There's no question about that. How do we get people to realize that it's going to be important, I don't know, to support this, for the future? I mean, I think we really have to be future thinking, future forward, just forward thinking all the time with this, that it has to be, there's gonna be a lot of, but you know what they did on this, right?
Yeah.
A lot of that. So I think that's something, if we can get that out as we're going through the whole thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think initially getting it kicked off, just having a plan, and having
Well,
some
yes,
tangible,
this is so amazing.
some tangible items, I think does send a message that we are forward thinking, that
Yes.
we've got a path forward. And I think, as we work throughout the next 10 years, it's also just being responsive to what the interest and the needs
Yeah.
can be.
Well, that'll
and
be-
not necessarily, being locked into a solution, that we came up with now, but if there's solutions that make sense that address one or part of this area,
Yeah.
then I think we need to, be responsive to that. And that'll be ultimately up to school boards and then ultimately up to the community of whether or not to support it. So I think that's just a constant work in progress. I think that's why it's important to vote. I think it's why it's important to have candidate sessions. I think it's important, this is something that we should bring up on an annual basis as part of keeping just in the mindset of in order to be, the place that we want Oshkosh to be for our kids and for our future, this is an important plan. So how do you feel about this plan? Are there areas that we move forward? So.
And you are right, it is way different than the way it used to be, and I think this cuts across, doesn't matter where you are on a political spectrum, you want your public schools to be a tailwind for the economic development of your community.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and we've seen that even in the first phase. To me, it's not lost on me that we have a unanimously approved board consolidation plan to consolidate schools in Oshkosh. That's a big deal.
Huge. And my concern partly is that down the road, 10 years from now, there will be a different school board of, 14 times.
Yeah. But just having as new school board members come on,
This is
they're
part of their-
inheriting the plan
Yeah.
that exists, and as we continue to have success in that plan, it becomes a course. It's not just a plan anymore, it's a course that we're gonna be walking.
That really
And
lovely.
you start to see, we envision there's gonna be some incredibly positive, both fiscally as well as instructionally positive outcomes from the first phase of this plan that we can show people and shout to the rafters. And that's just gonna create energy for the other phases of the plan, and ultimately it bleeds over into this. Because your communities are either they're growing or they're declining. There is no status quo anymore.
I think it's important to say in this statement too that we're building top-notch facilities that will make Oshkosh a draw from people around the state. I think that's really important because we're not just building, these average facilities everybody else has.
Sure.
We talked a lot about that.
Yeah, I think and we maybe tease that out a little bit more. I think that's what we're getting at for destination city. But again, the quality of the facilities, I think, may be something to highlight more as how we get to that destination city is that you have top-notch facilities.
Right.
And I think making it, clear that there's a lot of ways to be a destination city. So obviously there's the travel piece, but also, for corporations trying to recruit new employees. I mean, this is a retention, quality of life thing. Obviously it's for the students that are here, but for the future of our community. I mean, schools are, a huge driver for why people would relocate, move, all of that. So I think showing that big circle of, it's definitely, the visitor spending is great, but, I mean, our corporations are looking for people.
Yeah.
So, using that as probably a bigger selling point right now.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really part of a larger recruitment strategy
Yeah.
from a community standpoint.
Yeah, yeah.
Great, thanks. Any other?
Sorry, but I have to leave. It's okay. Too many meetings.
All right, and then, so then the idea was then to just transition into each one of these 4 areas as we would move forward. And again, this is where we had like, I think, 10 questions on the screen that seemed to be a little bit overwhelming, at least when I read it. So what I took a stab at, and again, we can work through this changes as needed, but took a stab at is why do we need it, the indoor multi-purpose facility, or whichever one it is. Why do we need it? What are we building? So being explicit about that, and then where should this facility be located? I think those are just some primary questions to be able to address. So I took a stab at those, answering those questions for each one of those, and then followed up with some of the primary plans. So again, indoor multi-purpose facility, limited space available at current high school sites to accommodate inclement weather practices, students' increased needs for out-of-season training and club sports practices and competitions. So that's really getting at some of the pragmatic aspects of why we would need it. Again, what are we building, and where should this facility be located? Again, not naming any specific site, but trying to narrow it down, a little bit to some places that we. So, thoughts on this format for each one of them, or specifically on this for this slide? Does that hit, I guess, either from committee members or from administrators? Does that kind of capture anything? Yeah.
One thing that you took out was what are we building, which states some of the sports that the facility would be used for. I wonder if that could help putting it back in, make it a little bit more explicit.
About the specific sports?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, we can.
I mean, I understand why you're trying to shorten it, but.
Yep, no, I also want to make sure that we're thorough with it. Okay. So in this facility, then specifically thinking about basketball, volleyball, wrestling, whatever we know.
Football, soccer,
Whatever you can get.
track, baseball, softball, pickleball.
So list all of our sports in our right.
That's a hot seller.
Yeah.
Everything but swimming, I think.
Everything
but swimming.
Add pickleball, I will pass it in.
Okay, but listing.
Yeah, exactly. I remember on early budget reconciliation committees, people being specifically attuned to what will happen to this sport, because my kids or my family loves this sport. They might focus in on that a little bit more. They might be more amenable to.
Sure, yeah, okay. Good. Yep, I think we can definitely do that. Anything else? That's right. So next slide then just lays out, again, a sample of what it would potentially look like. So with the floor plan, so first floor plan and second floor plan. And again, not that this is exactly what we would end up with, but this is what we had talked about, having the 4 courts, basketball courts, on the field house side, and then the 120 yards of turf inside, and then that second floor plan having some seating as an opportunity. So again, just to be able to provide just a sample, some context there. And then we move to kind of an outdoor site plan, if you will, and kind of zoom out for looking at capacity and looking at parking potentially. And then also trying to give people an idea of approximate site size. So when we're thinking about where we would put this, we've got an idea whether it's 9 acres or whether it's 40 acres. certainly going to make a big difference on site, so wanted to be able to tease that out also. And again, this is a pretty standard, I mean, this is a standard calculation, so there may be variances that need to come into these things that when we actually get to constructing something, but this is again the idea of a pretty standard outline. Questions on that or anything to add? And then the cost, so, having the preliminary cost estimates, and again, these are quite a ways out from when you'd ever do any estimating for construction, and using summer of '27 for a bid date, but also want to be able to provide some context for people, so people aren't thinking that this is a $2 million type of project, that we have some perspective on what we're talking about. And again, this would be kind of a comprehensive delivery of the site as it's listed. We're certainly flexible to parts of it, at a time, certainly amenable to any sponsorships or donations that we take, which we can express in that, but again, just trying to be able to provide some perspective for cost. So that's essentially how each one of the areas, all 4 areas, are set up. Again, so back to, and then going to the Performing Arts Center. So is there anything on the indoor multi-purpose facility that you want? Does that look like it covers some of the high points? We'll make sure we get the sports listed specifically on there.
Do we need to say anything about concession space? I remember that was more.
Yeah, concessions.
Concessions is in that
If we
footprint?
have that.
Yep.
Okay.
First and second floor, I believe.
But specifically calling out for kind of the hospitality side of it.
Yeah. I don't know if that's too detailed. It was
I mean,
something we
we could,
discussed.
we could say, 4-court field house and 120-yard indoor turf field plus supporting amenities for, it would just make it more general, but, maybe just add a little bit of a descriptor there.
What if concessions are something people are like, oh, they've got concessions? Like I've got a lot of space, because I think in some of these facilities, there's no space to do anything but come in and play. And so, maybe that, just teasing that. That's pretty
About a lot.
All right, so Performing Arts Center. So again, why do we need it? And this is being really explicit to North specifically, and I think that's where we landed. So the why being, North is the only, we'll have the only school auditorium remaining on the north side of Oshkosh, not sufficient for the needs of the district or the community. New north side auditorium needed to serve the needs as well as the surrounding. So again, the idea that we're kind of deficient as we're looking at it. So what are we building? So we've got the 1,050-ish seat auditorium, appropriate supports for plays, concerts, presentations, and community events. And where would the facility be located? And we were again explicit to Oshkosh North, as we would see that being the best solution. So, yeah.
I'm wondering if there's somewhere either in the why do we need it or what are we building that could explicitly say the part about that Val Phillips will not have. I know you say that Oshkosh North, but I just talked to 2 community members yesterday that assumed that there was an auditorium in Val Phillips.
Okay.
So maybe even in that part that says support features for plays, concerts, middle school and elementary, or something that's included in there, so that,
Sure.
or on the top that both the new elementary and the new middle school will not have an auditorium.
Sure.
How many seats are there at Webster's auditorium?
It's about 400.
Okay, that's important too, I think. That's going to be a much larger, I mean, does Merrill actually have an auditorium?
They do
No.
not.
I didn't think
No.
so. So the middle school, so that's really important because not that it's a huge deal, but for all the elementary schools to go over to West for their holiday programs and stuff. It's not a big deal, but it's
Right.
nicer to stay.
Right.
Yeah, well, and we want to be able to split them out, I mean, just from a calendaring standpoint, it
Yeah.
just makes
Oh,
makes
yeah.
it much more.
Oh my gosh, yes.
feasible.
Right.
Okay. Good, that's helpful, thank you. All right, and again, proposed plan, we have the first floor and second floor, or this is the first floor plan, I should say. And this has got first floor pit and then the second floor plan. And then a little bit again about the site. Again, it's a little bit different because we know it would be at north, so give you a little bit of context for what the parking would be. And then just some perspective on how that would lay out. And then again, similar to the indoor facility, I'm looking at the cost breakdown. Again, estimates consistent with the summer of 2027. All right, any questions on performing arts?
On the cost estimates, will we be, well, is it worth trying to mention that if we could build sooner, we would have a lower cost?
I mean, it's
What do you
worth
think?
mentioning, but, I mean, they're realistic, is it real, like, could it happen? I'm not sure. So, I guess
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the rationale for somebody to write a check tomorrow, because it's, but for us to go to referendum earlier, because it's gonna cost less, it's just not feasible, just within our debt structure. So, I think that'd be, we could mention it, but I'm not sure, like, there's
Yeah, that's why
right
I
max.
asked exactly.
Yeah.
is that something maybe we want to have our funding conversation, just to touch on that?
Yeah.
As we touch on 2027,
Sure.
we're planning on this because this is potential debt.
Yeah, to put some context into why summer of 2027. Yeah.
That's a good point, because people don't understand that at all.
Right,
That
yeah.
referendum's passed, so move on.
Yeah.
Have another one.
Yeah, you can build that in. Yeah. Have another one.
I think understand it myself.
Yeah, so just some debt retirement, referendum funding type of context, which sets the timeline for this, so it's a good point.
The other thing I was thinking about is for the capacity, do we want to point out why we picked 1,050?
Good, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
versus 800, kind of it's the balcony or not balcony
Yeah.
conversation, so.
Yeah, I think that could be powerful, and perhaps we put that in with the kind of intro slide of what are we building.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be, say that we did study an 800 seat, and that 1050 seemed like the right approach given the need in the north side.
I think for all these projects, we talked a lot about things that we needed to have in them. So like going along kind of with that of like things that like needed to be done in order for them to be top-notch facilities.
Sure. So drawing that out and why do we need it?
Right.
Type of thing. Good, yeah, we We can bullet point some of those.
I think of having good facilities that will also last, or that will remain good for 50 years. And that's the other issue. We just build it for now, and 10 years from now.
Yeah, right, so kind of the long-term use, sustainability piece of it.
Yeah, I think that's something we have to hit on.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Anything else on the performing arts side? All right, Aquatic Center, again, same context. Talk about aging facilities and upgrade at living space. Again, settling on the what for the 50-meter competition pool, along with warm water therapy pool and splash pad area. And then where should this facility be located? So I just put kind of two aspects of that. So one, I think it's worth exploring some partnerships. Existing community indoor pool facilities basically is looking at the YMCA, type of space. It doesn't make sense for any partnerships with them, or to be able to look at, our own aquatic center on a specific site that would be accessible for both high schools. So, I think those two are those two are important areas to be able to look at as we look at locations. So, and again, the site size, for this is very similar to the indoor, the indoor practice facilities. They're around 8 or 9 acres. So, as we be thinking about that, that'll have to be some of the balancing.
Did you add that because you know something's kind of possible?
No, I add that as I think it would be worth exploring conversations with the Y, or it would really be with the Y. I don't know if there's any other indoor pool, but he also runs indoor pools, right?
It's university, but.
Yeah.
No, it's that degree, yeah.
But probably, yeah, my head was more around kind of the YMCA's, ability to, again, partner. No, I don't know anything, specific, but again, pools are expensive to run, so, if there's cost efficiencies that you can have, and if systems already exist, it's helpful to be able to pair with systems that already exist. That might make sense. So again, for exploration more than anything else.
Underneath the, where should the facility be located, might that be a place where it could be explained what would happen to the existing?
Existing pools?
Pools,
Yeah.
The part that says existing pool space to be repurposed for other needs at each high
Yeah.
school? Because I think that's going to be a question that's going to come up immediately, especially with this, what are you going to do with the pools
Sure.
that you have?
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I think that's important. And certainly there's spaces that we want to be able to recapture that space. I think Craig and Brad already have uses for what that space could potentially be tomorrow if we went that direction. So, yeah, it'd be good to be explicit about that.
One thought about the warm water therapy pool and the splash pad area, because we had a discussion also about why are we building that when it's supposed to be for the schools? So I don't know if it would be helpful to say that those things in particular would also make it easier for the community to use.
Okay.
And maybe that's, but then you might have to get into because it's ORD, because.
You always have to get into the ORD versus the schools, and you have to at least, you guys did a really good job of the 5-second explaining the difference in the funding, because people sometimes just
Yeah. So maybe just emphasizing that up
Yeah.
here a little bit.
Yeah.
Just on the community, like the community side of it.
You sort of, you already do mention it, but
I mean, I would argue the school district's going to still use those, pools for younger kids, so,
Yeah.
whether there's field trips or whatever, so, I mean, I know what you're getting at, but I don't know that those aren't gonna be utilized by the district either, so.
At least for the time being.
it's true, because schools don't have one of those, they don't.
Well, and the warm water therapy tends to be more of a learn to swim type amenity, right? So, whether, again, it probably is used a little bit more from the rec department perspective, but I think, again, the opportunity for the, field trips or, the elementary to middle school students to utilize it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And we have some of our younger kids going over there, having swim lessons, on a regular basis. All right, good. Anything else on here? And again, sticking with the theme, being able to give an outline of the first floor and second floor plan, what that would look like. And then the site plan, Aquatic Center, approximately 7 acres, what that parking looks like. Mapping that with the code. And then again, the cost of that entire package. All right, anything else with the Aquatic Center? Okay, yeah. That's why we're here.
One of the things that we had talked about, why, justification for getting the 15-meter facility was so that we can invite people for events. So, should we mention invitationals? I know we sort of did at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah, so just the larger invitational events.
Yeah. I don't want it to get too long either, but I remember that the why, the scheduling was difficult if we were relying on the why, so,
Right.
anyway, well.
Along those lines, it might be interesting, and I don't know if this is the place to do it, but it might be interesting to include, like, this would be one of 3 like this in the state. Or like, what is that, like,
It's uniqueness.
put the map, like what puts us on the map in that way? Like, I know like the Schrader Aquatic Center for years was like the go-to because that were the only ones that had the facilities. Like, I think that resonates with people, like, how does this put Oshkosh on the map in a different way or in a more elevated way? I don't know.
Or something.
Yeah.
It would tie in the destination.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And then
What
show
you're
like
saying
how
that- yeah.
special it is or the kinds of things you could bring in because there's not a lot of places like it in the state.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That might be more of a marketing thing, but it might be good for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think we can weave into some of these initial questions. Leave somewhere in here,
Yeah.
tease out, and maybe even put kind of why is it unique, or phrase that as a separate section, because each one of these, I think, is in its own way, I mean, not necessarily the PAC, but the other 3, I think, are unique.
Right.
All right. And last then, for the section would be outdoor competition and practice facility. Again, why do we need it? Space limitations on the current sites. Shared use to give district and community more flexibility. Outdoor competition for football and soccer, 4 softball fields, 2 baseball, and a handicap accessible play field. So location, because we were kind of all over the map on this, and we really don't know, I just put, one of the things that I drew from our conversations was just the importance of it being like highly visible if possible. Just I think from a donation or sponsorship standpoint. Now that, could be out on the highway, could be downtown, it could be, I guess there's different levels of, or different areas to be visible, but I thought capturing that was important. And obviously sufficient land. I mean, this is the one that really makes it difficult when you're talking about, 40 to 50 acres worth of land that you would need. There's just more limitations on this than there is on the other three. So I just left it kind of like that and thought that would be up in the air. Again, trying to provide as much flexibility for people that, so people don't read this and be like, oh, I don't think it should be downtown, or I don't think it should be out on Highway 41. Like, fine. So be in the space where you think it should be, as long as, it's in a visible area that would be accessible, and have sufficient land, and that to me is
Well, once
wide
again,
open to options.
we don't know what's gonna happen.
Right.
7 to 10 years from now, we have no idea.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the spirit of it,
Yeah.
like keep it open.
Is there any way that, some notation to the fact that we discussed the fact that transportation for our students might be, we're aware of that we addressed it, or we know that we might have to provide shuttle service, or depending on where, so that people don't just think we forgot about it. We did spend some time talking about
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
how do we get our kids there, and that shuttle service might have to be provided or would be considered, or however we want to word, but that it was acknowledged.
Yeah, and I
this
have
whole
that on a
process.
later slide under frequently asked questions.
Okay.
But it might be worth, because I think this is the hot, I mean, and we probably should mention it here too, is this is just, I think, the acknowledgement of Riff Road, like the pain point that Riff Road provides as far as like transportation that we want people to know that we had that discussion, and that we're aware of that. And that, okay. Okay, anything else on here? I think this would be another place where we can draw like the uniqueness, like conversation that we had related to like the pony fields, with having pony baseball, that might be something that we can draw out on here. Also to the first page. This was something that the school board's been talking about, so I wanted to make sure that this was captured as part of our conversations. This is feedback that we got from subject matter experts related to tracks, like how many tracks do you need, and what would we want to be able to settle with. So I think what we had talked about at the last meeting was being able to have kind of a four-track system, track at west, track at north. Bell Phillips track, and that's an important piece right now, actually, in our current planning, because that's in the green space of where Merrill currently is standing, and that would be part of what's planned for the demolition of Merrill and that entire block to be green space, basically flipping what was green space onto the current site. But putting a track there will be important for the board to be able to get feedback on coming from the committee. And then track out at Traeger. So basically then you're funneling the middle school track into their own spaces, combining at the west side middle schools and combining at Traeger, and then Bell Phillips will be the middle school on the north side. So I thought that was important to specifically address. So this again is the site size, which I think is important again to give people some context about what we're looking at, and then using this map to give people an idea, a picture of what it would look like with some parking that would be adjoining to all those fields. Again, the pony fields were kind of called out, in a mix of turf and grass fields, along with the soccer / football competition stadium, if you will. Along with flexibility for lacrosse or anything else that we end up playing in that space. a little bit of sense of capacity, again, so people would know that. And then what that cost is. And this will be another one, I think we could probably tease out the sports that are gonna use it, you know, being a little bit more specific on the slides. So, any questions or any feedback on the outdoor competition facilities?
I have a question about the hazardous materials note. Is there, I know it could, maybe it's gonna be low, but on average, is it possible to even state what the average cost would be of managing hazardous materials? Just, I'm wondering, because if somebody says, oh, here's the price, but it doesn't include something that, let's say we know is gonna cost $2 million at a time, right?
I think it's really specific to the site, right? If you know that you're building on an old factory and you have hazardous chemicals in the ground that needs to be brought out, right, then we can say that, right? But if we're saying that we're in a farm field and we really don't know what we're up against, like, it's hard to, you know, it's really site dependent, in my opinion, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the projects have an estimating contingency right now and a project contingency, so I would say more often than not, a bad situation such as that should fall into those that you can absorb it. But yes, if we pick a site and we find, you know, it's the perfect site, but it has, I don't know, you know, foundry sand is the one we get in a lot of places. It has foundry sand, which means it has to be removed and there's some cost. Then again, we're gonna have to update these budgets once we go through the process and identify them. And so, yeah, that, you know, the purchase of the land is another thing we didn't include in these budgets as well. So I think it would be a little presumptuous to just carry something not really knowing, because I would bet it's more likely that we'll probably select a farm field, you know, than a hazardous factory type situation, right, to build this. But
So I guess that's why we did what we did, if that makes sense.
Good. Any other questions or feedback on the outdoor competition practice facility? All right, and we did include the slide for all projects together. So this is the deep breath, don't gasp slide, but being able to provide that range. Thinking that when you see all four of them together, again, the emphasis is that they all four don't need to go together. There might be bits and pieces of some that we'd want to work through, but this is what they would kind of collectively look like. So, is that helpful? Is that more problematic? Is that, you know, any sense or feedback on that? I mean, I think from my perspective, if I'm a board member, if I don't have this slide, then I'm going back through the slides and I'm doing the addition myself.
You're gonna get the question regardless.
Yeah, you're gonna get the question.
So in order to make sure we have accurate math, you know, and that everybody's seeing the same number, I thought that made sense.
If you want to keep pointing out that it's over the course of
Yeah.
10 years, or whatever, barring any
Yeah, and that the
donations.
dates are here, and again, we're looking at donations, we're looking at, it's a process, and it's not expected that we would do all of these, you know, at the same time.
Right.
Like the idea is that these are needs that we have, here's what some realistic estimates are as we're moving forward, and this is where we're at.
In that case, would it be good to say something like that on that slide, just in case somebody doesn't catch it when you're speaking about it?
Sure. Yeah, just kind of a
Yeah, that they're not all
disclaimer.
needed at the same time.
Yeah. All right, and then try to just think about, again, frequently asked questions, and this could be a long, you know, a long list. This is where the transportation question, was answered there. Just things that I thought we could do. So what is the timing of these projects? So I think that maybe is something that we build in earlier in the presentation to talk about referendum, debt, retirement, and what the schedule is. Sounds like we could flip that to more of the front to be able to provide some context on that. Transportation, again, just wanted to make sure that people were aware that we were thinking of location of facility, OASD, exploring shuttle, making sure that it's accessible to all the kids. And then will the rec department be responsible for these programs? Part of what I thought was important to put in here, because I've heard some feedback just in my conversations in the community, is just the collaboration and coordination with the YMCA and the Oshkosh Senior Center, that we're not looking to like overtake programs that are at, like the Senior Center, for example. We want to bring all seniors in so we can play pickleball under one roof. And kind of carve out that from other services. We're really looking to build on and expand opportunities that we'd have, draw more people to Oshkosh with these facilities. So I thought that was important to put in there, that that's part of our context, that we're aware of that. Any other FAQs that pop in your head at this point that you think should be addressed? And again, part of this would be just a primer for FAQs that we could anticipate, and then in the presentation, again, hopefully we're able to get a couple of you to be able to be there. So as board members have questions, then you could answer those, or we collectively we can be able to give feedback and what are some of the thought process of the committee, or what were some of the discussions. Again, we'll provide all that feedback and we'll give that in a written report, but it's always nice to be able to hear that from people that were at the table at the time. So,
Are we planning to have a list of some of the facilities that have been built around in neighboring school districts, so that we can at least show by comparison that our facilities really are old and aging, or they're aging? Just to make sure that people understand that this is not coming out of a vacuum, that we're not just making up this need. I know I may be mixing board report with the marketing of why we need to.
yeah, so I'm thinking about things that we've looked at. So it would be, some of the, so like just take the Aquatic Center, like taking pictures of like our pool compared to what they have like in West Pier, or in other places. I mean, those are things that we could, that we could pull out. Again, I'm trying to make sure that this doesn't go an hour and a half for a presentation either. So we could pull some of those things into the written report. Again, that wouldn't necessarily go on a presentation, but that the board would have access to. And again, it's more of just the committee has done its job, has provided these recommendations to the Board of Education. That's what the board asked for. The community, marketing piece, or the need, that's we're a ways off from that at this point. But we certainly want to document what the committee has come up with, because as we would put together that plan and do some education of the community as we're moving forward, we want to make sure that we're capturing some of that. I would say. Brett?
As we progress through this process, would it be a good idea to consider, like we have the website, the referendum, all the questions go, but to create some type of pictorial view of what our facilities are like. So if people don't want to come in and take a look, we can actually show them, what kind of condition they're in. So if they, later on, as we move through this process, want to know what we have.
Sure. Yeah, we could do that, and I think that might be more of a website, kind of a website landing spot, if you will, where we could archive something.
Because I think for the Smith repairs, we saw photos of those, and I was like, ooh, okay, that's quite convincing.
Well, same with Merrill and Webster. I think we shared a lot of pictures and the communication effort there of some of the challenges of those buildings. So
We did that with Oak Lawn too.
Yeah, so same, applying that same principle to views.
Yeah, because I can imagine if someone's paying attention and decides to be offended or take, to take the other side of the, I guess, the question, well, no, actually, this is not likely to sway them, but let's say media decide to take up the story, they would probably be happy to have access to photos.
Yeah. And I think just being able to document that, right, and build that story up as we go, so it's not 5 years from now, it's not a big surprise, like, oh my gosh, we didn't know that happened. I mean, we're kind of constantly, we're trying to keep it, and that's part of the struggle about doing this now and not having a referendum for a while is how do you keep it in the narrative? So pictures usually, are good at providing some of that. And we certainly have enough kind of coaches and administrators to be able to speak to some firsthand knowledge of it. Correct?
I think the other thing, Dave always says only 20% of the district have kids, and of those families, say 10% of them are actually active and going to these other communities, and they're really the only ones that see what Oshkosh doesn't have. And those of us who have made the rounds, it's blatantly clear to us, but it's not to somebody who doesn't leave Oshkosh. They're like, what do you mean? We're fine, and we're far from fine.
Yeah. So that's where that
There's
side.
the campaign.
Yeah, we're far from
We're close to others, but far from fine. So we can, So the vision that I have then is kind of split screen. You're just showing pictures, right? Showing those comparables. So. All right. So we have our spokesperson picked, so that's good. Thanks, Greg. All right. Other thoughts? So again, that's the last slide then that we had for the presentation. Again, trying to take 10 meetings worth and 4 months worth of conversations into a 10 or 15 minute presentation. It'll probably be a little bit longer than that. But again, we typically have a written report which we'll construct, draft, and then be able to send out to you to be able to get some feedback on. But I wanted to be able to, we didn't have time to turn that around this week, so wanted to be able to just provide just some feedback on the slides. So we've got a lot to be able to do some revisions to, which I think is really helpful. Does that kind of characterize, do you feel like that's a fair characterization of the work that's been done? Again, the board would expect, the committee to be able to come forward, give recommendations on these 4 areas. So the direction is not to prioritize them because, again, we don't know what things are going to change. We don't know what interest, may be out there for donations or for sponsorships or other areas. We have a definitive location for the Performing Arts Center and not for the other 3. So let's just kind of leave it up to to future boards to be able to work through. But I think from my perspective, I think you guys have done a great job in being able to ask a lot of good questions, get some of those clarifications, and it really presents what I think facilities-wise, if we can get to some or all of these, I think really does put us in a much better place, much different trajectory than we're on right now. So I appreciate that. All right. So I usually leave these meetings and I'm like, oh yeah, there's one more thing that I wanted to say. So give everybody permission to be able to, you've got my email, if you've got things that you remember, that you're like, well, can we think about adding this to the slide, or have questions, another frequently asked questions, whatever it is, send me that note, give me a call. Happy to work through that. Committee members, I'd ask for, if you're interested in presenting at the board, it's pretty painless generally, nice group of people. It's going to be July, so I understand that's a little bit difficult for schedules, but if you're available on July 13th and interested in participating, it's just helpful for the board to hear some context from community members administratively, we're in it so deep and doing it every day that it's always refreshing to hear some insight. So I'll send an email out if you're interested, just reply back to that. And then we'll get, hopefully 2 or 3 people to be able to participate as part of that. Again, send you a draft of the written report out. We'll do that in enough time where you can give some feedback and things that would need to be added, add some of the pictures, and just some of the more contextual things. Like I said, I anticipate in that written report being able to provide all of the feedback summaries that we had from each one of our meetings, because I think those really captured a lot of the questions and responses. So that'll just be kind of an addendum, if you will, to that written report. So that would be out there as we move forward. But for me, it's always tricky to be able to synthesize everything down into a presentation that doesn't just kill people, in the process. So I was hopeful that this would hit on that. So. All right. Any final words? Geez, I feel like this is kind of it's not you, it's me, kind of breakup. But we know that we're on this journey for a long time here, and so it's not a breakup. It's just that we don't have to meet every other week. So in some ways, that's certainly helpful for all of us. So, any final thoughts from the committee? Any words?
Thanks.
I volunteer Julia.
There you go. All right.
Oh, yeah, that was
Anybody who's not here is presenting at the board meeting. Yeah, that's usually how it goes. Right? Good. Any final thoughts from administrative team? Anybody?
Nope.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving each other a round of applause.